I'm here on the River Wensum in Norfolk, and it is my favourite river, I guess, in all the world. I've known it since I was a kid, and it's been incredibly kind to me, even on days like this where it's blowing an absolute hoolie, there's rain in the air, and the temperatures are dropping like that. But I'm still hopeful of a few chub, because this is the Wensum. I've known it for so long, and I'm at home. This is a place I know and love the best. Now it's late November, we're just on the cusp of winter really, and it's a difficult time of the year because the water temperatures are dropping very, very quickly, and the air temperatures too. Today is a cold day. But strangely, despite all the rain that we're having, the river itself is still at low summer type levels, and it really hasn't come up at all. It's still crystal clear, and you can even walk across it in places. So I know I've got my work really cut out if I'm going to catch a fish or two. It's low, it's clear, and it's cold. Everything that's bad for chub fishing. So because I know it's going to be a really difficult day down here on the river, I've got 3 setups which I know are going to give me the very, very, very best chance of a fish. I'm only here for a couple of hours, 2-3 hours is my lot. I like to fish really tight and intense and make the very most of just a couple of hours out in the countryside. First rod, well, it's a bomb rod. It's 10 feet long, test curve of probably just over half a pound, probably 10-12 ounces, something like that. It's got a glass tip in it because they're just a little bit softer than the carbon tips, and I'm really, really going for sensitivity today. The reel is of course an ordinary fixed spool reel. I've got 6-pound line on it, straight through. You're often very, very pleased to have 6-pound line on because a big chub, they always thrust for the margins to get into that marginal weed bed, and sometimes you've really got to pile the pressure on, and that's where you're happy you've got 6-pound breaking strain. So let's just have a look at the rig. Now what I'm often laughed at over is the simplicity of my rigs. I just don't do complicated. Now this is simplicity itself. I've just used the sleeve of a ledger stop. There, I've put the line through it, and then just nip the 2 ends of the line together there with an SSG shot. You can add shot, you can take shot off, you can really, really just totally adapt to the strength of the river current. Perfect. Now I stop this little running link with just an ordinary ledger stop, which works very, very, very well in this type of river. And then I've got a short tail of what's that? Just over a foot, I suppose, 13 inches perhaps, to a size 10. That's perfect for chub, especially if you're going to use bread for bait, which is probably what I'm going to use here on the quiver tip. You'll notice I've still got a micro barb on this hook. For me, the jury's out when it comes to barbless. I do like just a small barb on most of the hooks I use. So how do we put the bread on? Well, I like a nice, cheap, cheerful loaf, and I will pull off a piece of bread about that sort of size, you know, big postage stamp, something like that. Now how I put this on is critical. I simply push the hook through the bread so that I'm holding the bend in my fingers, the fingers of my right hand, and with my left hand I simply squeeze the bread round the shank and the eye. And of course that hook point is nicely exposed, so if I do get a bite, I'm likely to set the hook. And I'm not looking for big bites in cold, clear water. It's critical that you leave that hook point exposed. One nice thing about using this bread flake like this is because it's still quite fluffy, it keeps the air in it, so it's very, very buoyant. And as it floats slowly down towards the bottom, it'll hit bottom and then it'll just rise and fall as fish approach it. Perhaps even just the turbulence from the pectoral fins will make it rise and fall. So it'll look really natural. It won't look at all as though there's a hook tethering it to the bottom. Really natural. Now what you're likely to get it very often is the chub coming up, just pulling it, just testing it if you like. So sometimes your tip will just flicker, then the chub will make the mind up, grab it, big pull round, fish on, job done. That's what you're hoping anyway. You've got to do a bit of exploring on a big swim like this. Even though the water is very low, it's still cold, so the fish aren't always moving around that much. Now I've tried on the far side, in that big deep slack, I've tried in the flow. There's a nice, quite deep eddy just on my near bank, so I'm just going to pop it down there. And with so many otters about, very frequently you find that the chub really prefer close swims in where they feel just a little bit more secure. Each swim presents its own challenge. You've got to try and read it. You've got to approach it really quietly. Think what the best approach is. You've got to be extremely adaptable when it comes to catching chub on tiny little rivers like this. They're always going to want a different approach, a different bait, a static bait, a moving bait. Do you know, every now and again I can just feel a crinkle on the line, and that's almost always a fish going past just brushing the line. And it's not a bite, you don't strike at it, just there again. I think that, and there, that's a fair indication that there are fish actually down there beneath me. Could be leaves, but I don't think so. I think the water's just too slack where my bait has actually ended up. So much more likely to be fish just moseying past. Even on a small river like this upper river Wensum, you've still got to interpret the currents. And even though the water is very, very low, you can still read the push of the water. You've got the main flow going down. But then when the current begins to peter out, it curls back on itself. It's quite exciting really. As it moves towards the far bank, it just curls round to the right and just gives that seemingly lifeless eddy opposite us just a bit of movement. And chub often like that. They'll obviously be very, very receptive to food, and they'll be covering all this pool, but if you can, they do have favourite areas, there's no doubt about that. And if you can just find areas where there's a bit of push, where there's a bit of current, and then slack water immediately off it, that's often where you'll find a chub. They can often just lie up in the slack water and move just a foot or two into the current to intercept bait going past.